Hi, I'm Andrew Torget with Texas History for Teachers. When most people think about the Texas Revolution, they usually think about men fighting in places like the Alamo and San Jacinto. But it turns out that women also played a crucial and central role in the Texas Revolution. And that's important to understand because the revolution affected everyone in 1835 and 1836, not just the soldiers on the front lines. Now, in the 1800s, women were not allowed to fight in the armies. So when the Texas Revolution began, women who wanted to help had to offer support in other ways. Many women, for example, began sending supplies to the army or made clothes for Texas soldiers. Most women helped by taking on more work at home. You see, when their husbands and sons left to fight, all the farm work normally done by men, like tending the animals and picking cotton, was now left to women, which they had to do on top of all the other work that women normally did. And so many women during the war ended up running pretty much everything on their farms, while at the same time also watching and raising their children as their husbands fought Santa Anna's forces. And that mattered, because if these women had not stepped up at that moment and filled those roles, Texas would not have had any men in its army. And while that extra work on the farm was hard, for most women, the most difficult part of the war came after the fall of the Alamo. You see, the news that Santa Anna had killed all the Alamo defenders in early March 1836 quickly spread like wildfire across Texas. And when General Sam Houston then began retreating with his army, Texan families suddenly realized, to their horror, there was now nothing between them and Santa Anna's army, which was now marching directly toward them. And because he had killed everyone at the Alamo, everyone feared that Santa Anna would now kill any Texans he found, which, as you can imagine, set off waves of panic across Texas farms. And as soon as they heard that Santa Anna was marching their way, thousands of Texans immediately threw whatever few possessions they could get into wagons and saddlebags, and then they abandoned their homes as they began a terrified scramble toward the east, toward the Louisiana border, desperately hoping to get away from Santa Anna and the oncoming Mexican army. Now, all of this happened incredibly fast. I mean, imagine what it would be like to abandon your home in just a matter of minutes with whatever few things that you could carry. One man named Noah Smithwick traveled down a road where houses had been abandoned by panicked Texans, and he later described that, quote, houses were standing open, the beds unmade, the breakfast things still on the tables, all abandoned. Because many of the men were in the army with Sam Houston, a very large number of these Texans trying to escape were women, often with their children. And these women had an incredibly hard time escaping because the spring of 1836 was tremendously rainy. That meant that all the roads, which were dirt roads during this era, had been turned into muddy bogs that made it nearly impossible to travel. People, wagons, horses, they all got stuck in the mud that often came all the way up to people's knees. And some women tried to make their wagons lighter by throwing out whatever few possessions they had, and when that didn't work, many just abandoned their wagons entirely and continued alone on foot. But even then, the mud slowed everything down to a crawl. And this mad scramble of Texans trying to get away from Santa Anna's armies is called the Runaway Scrape. And it was one of the central experiences of women during the war. All of them were terrified that at any moment, Santa Anna's soldiers could come riding up, and that would mean that they and their children might all be killed, just like the Alamo defenders. Some of these women had their property taken from them by the Texas Army, which needed all the supplies that it could get. One woman named Elmira McElroy was traveling in a wagon with her kids during the Runaway Scrape. And when she reached the San Jacinto River, soldiers from Sam Houston's army took her wagon from her so that the army could use it. And she never got it back. From then on, she and her kids simply had to walk as they made their way east. Another woman named Pamela Mann had her oxen taken from her by the Texas Army so that the army could use them to haul cannons. And Pamela had been okay with this as long as the Texas Army continued to retreat eastward. But when the army finally turned to march directly towards Santa Anna and to fight him at San Jacinto, Pamela declared that it was time to take back her oxen. So she marched right up to them, cut the harnesses that tied her oxen to the army's cannon, and then began leading them away. And when a Texas soldier saw this and tried to get the oxen back, Pamela Mann pulled a pistol on him and refused to give her oxen back. And so she got to keep them. Now, the final battle itself, the Battle of San Jacinto, took place on the farm of a widow named Peggy McCormick. Now, Peggy was a native of Ireland, and she had come to Texas with her husband Arthur and their 2 sons in 1823. But when Arthur died the next year, Peggy had been left to run the farm pretty much all by herself. And as fate would have it, that would end up as the site where Sam Houston and the Texans defeated Santa Anna's forces on April 21st, 1836, and ended the Texas Revolution. Now, Peggy had abandoned her farm before the battle, and when she returned, she was absolutely devastated by what she saw. Her entire farm had been destroyed, the bodies of dead soldiers were everywhere, and all of her cattle had been eaten by both armies. And so that meant that Peggy would have to rebuild her farm and her life in the aftermath of the Revolution. And that was true for most Texas women. We tend to forget that after the war, when people returned to their homes, they often found their houses looted, their farms destroyed, or in some cases burned, by either the Texas or Mexican armies. And so after San Jacinto, women would join their husbands and their sons in rebuilding their homes and lives in Texas, just as these women had joined in all the tremendous sacrifices of the Texas Revolution.